Hello and welcome back to Z Sci-Fi Stories. Before we begin, I want to share that YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without a budget to operate and pay our dedicated team. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our staff can cover their living expenses and continue bringing these adventures to you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or comments below. They thought that freezing our oceans would extinguish all resistance. They were wrong. Earth did not send a rescue ship. They sent a death sentence. But before the silence of the void was shattered by humanity's wrath, there was Avalon's Reach, a paradise lost in the blink of an eye. To understand the magnitude of the tragedy, one must first understand the breathtaking beauty of Avalon's Reach. It was a jewel of a world, an endless expanse of cerulean oceans that reflected the light of twin suns. Humanity had not conquered this planet. They had harmonized with it. Millions of colonists lived on sprawling, elegant floating cities that drifted with the gentle equatorial currents. Beneath the waves, massive tethers connected these artificial archipelagos to the ocean floor, tapping into the boundless geothermal energy of the planet's core. For over 2 centuries, Avalon's Reach had remained a tranquil haven, completely detached from the endless, noisy political disputes that plagued the wider Milky Way. There were no planetary defense cannons here, no orbital blockades. There was only the rhythmic, soothing sound of the waves. Ezekiel Burkett was a man who preferred that rhythm over the chaos of human interaction. As a quiet, methodical ecological engineer stationed at the central pumping facility of the capital city, his days were spent monitoring the delicate balance of the planet's biosphere. He was a man of charts, atmospheric readouts, and seismic data on what was supposed to be a standard Tuesday morning. Ezekiel sat alone in the subterranean monitoring room, his brow furrowed. The seismometers were twitching, drawing jagged, erratic lines across his glowing displays. It was not a tectonic shift. It was a massive, unnatural distortion in the planet's magnetic field. "Central Command, this is Burkett." Ezekiel spoke into his communicator, his voice tight, with an unfamiliar anxiety. "I am reading a total inversion of the magnetic poles across Sector 4. The local gravity field is fluctuating by 0.8%. Please advise." There was no response, just the chilling hiss of static. On the surface, the end did not announce itself with wailing sirens or the fiery re-entry of an invading armada. There was no grand declaration of war. The bright, twin-sunned sky of Avalon's Reach simply ceased to exist. In a matter of seconds, the heavens were eclipsed by colossal, magnetic prismatic machines. They hovered silently in the upper atmosphere, casting pitch-black shadows over the floating cities. These were the world engines of the Valian Empire, a race of ancient, aristocratic beings who viewed all other organic life in the galaxy as mere space parasites. To them, humanity was an infestation, and Avalon's Reach was an unclean petri dish that required sterilization. The Valians did not fire a single plasma torpedo. They did not deploy ground troops. Instead, the bellies of the great prisms opened, and they dropped their ecological purge pillars. Massive spikes of dark, supercooled alloy plummeted from the sky, piercing the oceans with deafening kinetic impacts. The moment the pillars embedded themselves into the planetary crust, the true horror began. The alien technology unleashed a wave of absolute zero energy. The ocean did not merely freeze, it crystallized instantly. Waves that were cresting in the wind turned into jagged, solid blades of ice mid-air. The sudden, violent expansion of the ice created artificial mountain ranges of frozen salt water that erupted upward, crushing the delicate, glass-domed floating cities as if they were made of fragile eggshells. Simultaneously, the pillars activated a localized atmospheric siphon. The oxygen was brutally and systematically drained from the air. Across the surviving floating platforms, Millions of people suddenly fell to their knees, clawing at their own throats. The chaos that spread across Avalon's reach was not born from the fear of bullets or laser fire. It was the primal, suffocating terror of nature being violently stripped away. The skies turned a bruised, sickly purple as the air thinned out to nothingness. Down in the central pumping facility, the temperature was plummeting at a catastrophic rate. Condensation froze on the walls. The reinforced bulkheads were groaning under the immense, shifting weight of the expanding ice above them. Ezekiel watched the life signs of the surface cities wink out by the hundreds of thousands on his monitor. His heart hammered against his ribs. The realization was cold and absolute. The surface was dead, and the freeze was pushing downward into the depths. He had less than 5 minutes before the central city's submerged foundations were crushed by the encroaching permafrost. Ezekiel Burkett slammed his fist onto the primary control console, pulling up the master schematics of the city's buoyancy and tethering systems. If they stayed, they would be entombed in solid ice. There was only one place the Valian freeze could not immediately reach: the abyssal trenches, heated by the furious, molten core of the planet itself. "May God forgive me," Ezekiel whispered to the empty room. He bypassed the central command protocols and initiated a manual override of the main buoyancy tanks. He typed in the command to detonate the safety valves. Deep within the city's infrastructure, explosive bolts shattered. The massive, buoyant air pockets that kept the central city afloat were violently vented. The structure shuddered violently as millions of tons of seawater rushed in. The surviving lower levels of the central city, housing thousands of terrified workers and their families, began to plummet into the pitch-black, freezing depths of the ocean. Ezekiel was intentionally sinking the remnants of human civilization down into the darkest, most crushing trench of Avalon's reach. It was a ruthless, terrifying decision, plunging them into a lightless abyss of extreme pressure. But down there, huddled around the boiling thermal vents of the planet's core, they would find the heat they needed to survive the ice. Down there, in the dark, humanity would endure. Down here, at a depth of 11,000 meters, the ocean did not just surround you. It actively tried to crush you into dust. The pressure against the surviving bulkheads of the sunken city sector was over 1,000 atmospheres. Every steel beam groaned a constant, agonizing metal shriek that echoed through the damp corridors. The darkness outside the reinforced, foot-thick viewports was absolute. A heavy, suffocating blackness, broken only by the angry crimson glow of the hydrothermal vents. Around these towering chimneys of boiling, mineral-rich water, Ezekiel and the remaining 4,000 human survivors had built their desperate sanctuary. They had tethered the sunken habitat directly to the volcanic fissures, utilizing the extreme geothermal heat to keep the freezing death of the surface at bay and to power the struggling electrolysis machines that stripped oxygen from the seawater. The air smelled of ozone, grease, and the sharp tang of fear. Life support was held together by salvaged wiring and sheer human stubbornness. Ezekiel spent his waking hours covered in hydraulic fluid, coordinating teams of deep-sea miners to patch microscopic fractures in the hull before the ocean could force its way inside. The temperature inside the habitat hovered around 12 degrees Celsius, cold enough to bite at their extremities, but warm enough to sustain biological functions. They drank recycled water that tasted faintly of sulfur and ate synthesized kelp paste. There was no panic left in them. The initial terror had been compressed by the crushing depth into a cold, hardened resolve. They were no longer colonists. They were trench dwellers, clinging to the edge of the abyss. But the Valians were thorough. They did not simply freeze the surface and move on. They sought absolute clinical sterilization. Sonar operators in the habitat's cramped command center began picking up faint, unnatural acoustic signatures descending through the kilometers of solid ice above. They were not conventional submarines. They were hunter-killer drones, made of a programmable liquid alloy, designed to slip through microscopic cracks in the ice and navigate the extreme pressures of the deep ocean. They moved like metallic squids, completely silent, save for the cavitation bubbles trailing their propulsion arrays. The Valians had detected the faint thermal signature of the sunken city and sent their exterminators to purge the remaining biological anomalies. "They are coming straight for the primary life support manifolds," a young sonar technician reported, his voice shaking but clear. "Distance is less than 5,000 meters and closing fast." Ezekiel wiped a streak of dark grease from his forehead and looked at the rugged, exhausted miners gathered around him. "If they breach the outer hull, the pressure differential will turn us into liquid in less than a second. We do not run. We do not hide. We break them first." Instead of despairing, the humans adapted with terrifying ingenuity. Ezekiel understood the massive geothermal drills they used to anchor the city better than anyone. Alongside the chief engineer, a gruff woman named Sarah, he led a team outside into the black water. They wore heavily armored, pressure-resistant diving suits made of titanium ceramic composites. Moving through the freezing, crushing water was like trying to walk through wet concrete. Every step required immense physical effort. They dragged heavy copper coils and industrial capacitors stripped from the city's secondary power grid. Working against the clock and the lethal environment, they manually rewired the massive magnetic drill heads, converting them into crude but devastatingly powerful electromagnetic pulse generators. They rigged the traps within the narrow basalt canyons leading to the thermal vents, using the natural topography to mask their energy signatures. Ezekiel monitored the sonar from a forward observation blister, his hands gripping the control panel. "Hold your positions. Let them enter the choke point. Wait until they are within 50 meters. 7 liquid metal drones glided into the canyon, their optical sensors glowing with a pale, cold blue light. They moved with a predatory grace, totally unaware of the brutal, mechanical trap laid by the species they considered inferior. "Now," Ezekiel commanded. Sarah slammed the manual heavy current breakers. The modified drills drew a massive, unsafe surge of power directly from the city's central capacitor banks. A localized, high-yield electromagnetic pulse detonated in the water. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the alien machines. The liquid alloy of the Valian drones immediately lost its structural cohesion. Their blue sensor lights flickered violently and died, paralyzed, unshielded, and unable to maintain their hydrodynamic forms. The machines were suddenly completely vulnerable to the hostile environment they had invaded. "Release the ballast gates!" Ezekiel shouted over the comms. The miners manually blew the emergency pressure valves on the canyon walls, directing a concentrated, high-velocity jet of abyssal water directly into the disabled drones. The sudden, violent shift in localized pressure slammed into the alien machines with the force of a runaway freight train. The liquid alloy was ripped apart, crushed flat, and scattered into the black water. The vaunted, elegant Valian technology was utterly destroyed by mud, magnets, and the sheer brute force of the ocean wielded by human hands. The human crew managed to drag the least damaged drone back into the habitat's heavy airlock before it collapsed entirely. It was a twisted mass of inert metal, but its central processing core remained intact. Ezekiel cracked open the casing using a high-intensity plasma cutter. Inside, he did not find standard circuitry or silicon chips. He found a glowing, crystalline lattice suspended in a vacuum seal. By running a low-voltage current through the lattice, he discovered its true nature. "It is not a radio," Ezekiel explained to the gathered engineers, his eyes reflecting the soft, pulsing glow of the alien core. "It is a quantum optoacoustic network. They are using entangled particles to transmit data through the ice directly to their orbital command station. It translates sound waves into light bursts at the quantum level, Zero latency. Perfect encryption. Can you shut it down so they cannot track us? Sarah asked, crossing her arms. I can do better than that, Ezekiel replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. I am going to reverse the uplink. He did not want to hide in the dark anymore. He wanted to scream into the void, working continuously for 24 hours without sleep. Ezekiel meticulously reconfigured the quantum lattice. He stripped away the drone's primary tracking subroutines and forced the core to accept external data inputs. He bypassed the Valian encryption by encoding the transmission with something the alien machines could not process or filter out: raw, messy human biometric data. He compiled the electrical patterns of his own heartbeat, the raw audio of the pressurized hull groaning under the ocean's weight, and the complex genetic sequence of the surviving colonists. It was an undeniable proof of life, a defiant roar wrapped in a highly compressed micro-data package. He aimed the signal not at the Valian fleet, hovering above the ice, but far beyond it, using the drone's quantum entanglement to punch a tiny, undetectable hole through the local space-time interference. He aimed it straight for Earth. It took 2 agonizing weeks for the biometric transmission to punch through the heavy spatial interference blanketing the system. The Valian orbital blockade created a massive field of static radiation, a deliberate shroud designed to isolate their victims. Down in the crushing blackness of the ocean trench, time was no longer measured by the rising or setting of twin suns, but by the relentless, rhythmic gasps of the failing life support pumps. The electrolysis machines, overworked and choked with mineral buildup from the hydrothermal vents, were burning out one by one. The air grew stale, heavy with the metallic taste of recycled carbon dioxide. According to the flickering environmental sensors, the 4,000 surviving humans huddled around the boiling vents had exactly 48 hours of breathable oxygen left. The cold was creeping further in, thick layers of white frost forming on the inner titanium bulkheads. The silence of the deep abyss was heavy and suffocating, a constant, physical reminder of their impending doom. High above the frozen, crystallized crust of Avalon's Reach, within the gleaming, sterile command center of the Valian flagship, Grand Magistrate Kalen observed the dying world with an expression of mild, aristocratic boredom. He was a creature of elegant, angular features, his tall frame draped in ceremonial robes woven from liquid starlight. A sub-commander, clad in sleek magnetic armor, approached his floating crystalline dais, bowing deeply before presenting a glowing optical datapad. An anomalous quantum fluctuation had just been detected, piercing through the planet's atmospheric blockade. It was a highly compressed, directional signal. A distress call, Kalen mused, his voice smooth, resonant, and entirely devoid of empathy. How remarkably quaint. The organic parasites actually managed to hijack one of our liquid surveyors before the pressure crushed them. He waved a slender, multi-jointed hand dismissively, not even bothering to order his tactical officers to initiate a signal jam. Let them scream their final words into the void, even if their primitive Earth receives this localized transmission this very second. The nearest human armada is at least 4 standard orbital cycles away. By the time their lumbering rescue ships arrive in this sector, this entire sphere will be a solid block of absolute zero ice. Let them come and gaze upon their frozen kin. It will serve as a permanent monument to their inferiority, Kalen scoffed lightly, turning his attention back to the planetary freeze projections, scrolling across his massive display. To the Supreme Commander, the transmission was not a tactical threat. It was merely the pathetic death rattle of a lesser species. He underestimated the cold, calculated wrath of a cornered predator. Kalen did not understand humanity. He expected a loud, panicked mobilization, a desperate, noisy scramble of warships, diplomatic pleas, and distress beacons scattered across the galactic net. What he received instead was the terrifying, absolute silence of the human war machine, deep within the sunken habitat. Ezekiel sat slumped over the makeshift quantum transceiver, his eyes bloodshot and heavy from sleep deprivation. The console had been completely dead for 14 days. Suddenly, the alien crystalline lattice flared with a blinding, aggressive crimson light. The terminal screamed with the harsh, sharp tone of an incoming, high-density data stream. "I have a signal lock!" Sarah yelled from across the cramped, grease-stained command deck, dropping her heavy hydrospanner onto the metal grate floor. "It is a direct quantum burst from Earth Command!" The exhausted survivors crowded around the central console, their breath catching in their throats, a desperate spark of hope igniting in their chests. They expected complex navigational charts, the precise arrival coordinates of the Sol Defense Fleet, or at least a recorded message of solidarity from the planetary coalition leaders. Instead, the console displayed a stark, minimalist black screen. There were no fleet manifests. There were no inspirational speeches. There were no empty promises of a heroic rescue. A single file appeared on the display. It was shockingly small, measuring merely a few kilobytes in size, designated simply as a microdata package. Its file name was a single, ominous word: Nemesis. "Is that it?" a young miner asked, his voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming despair. "A single text file. Where are the dreadnoughts? Where is the cavalry? They abandoned us." Ezekiel rapidly typed on the console, his fingers flying across the keys to decrypt the package using standard military protocols. Below the file name, a single line of plain text materialized on the screen. It was a direct, chilling order from the absolute highest echelon of Earth's military command. "Plug it into their purge core." Ezekiel read the words aloud, the sheer gravity of the command settling over the cramped room like a physical weight. There was no room for misinterpretation. There were no alternative tactical parameters. Earth was not coming to save them with guns blazing. The brutal, shocking reality washed over the hardened survivors. High Command had analyzed the raw telemetry data Ezekiel had encoded in his initial message. The tactical computers on Earth had calculated the mass, energy output, and firepower of the Valian fleet hovering over Avalon's reach, and realized an undeniable truth. An open, symmetric space battle would result in the complete and utter annihilation of any human rescue force. "They are not sending ships because a fleet would be wiped out before they even reach low orbit," Ezekiel explained, his mind racing as he analyzed the underlying structure of the Nemesis file. "The Valians have hundreds of prismatic dreadnoughts up there. Earth knows we cannot beat them with raw firepower. They are not even going to try." "Then what exactly is this?" Sarah pointed at the glowing screen, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. "A computer virus? A digital surrender treaty?" "It is a weapon," Ezekiel whispered, a terrifying realization dawning in his dark eyes as he looked at the intricate, incredibly dense code wrapped inside the micropackage. Earth is not going to fight the Valians. They are going to use the Valians' own world-ending technology against them. Command wants us to take this data drive, climb back up through kilometers of freezing water to the surface, and inject it directly into the central processing core of the giant machine that is currently freezing our planet to death. The silence in the room was absolute, far deeper and heavier than the black ocean pressing against their hull outside. The universe was quiet, and humanity's response was sharp, utterly cold, and terrifyingly unpredictable. They were not going to match the enemy's brute strength. They were going to turn the enemy's greatest weapon into an instrument of absolute vengeance. The suicide mission began in the crushing dark. Ezekiel, Sarah, and 4 other seasoned riggers sealed themselves inside their bulky, titanium ceramic pressure suits. To reach the surface, they could not simply swim up through 11,000 meters of solid, expanding ice. Their only path was violently paradoxical. They had to infiltrate the very machine that was killing their world. The colossal Valian purge pillar had driven a massive, dark alloy spike deep into the planetary crust, acting as a planetary-scale thermal siphon to extract the ocean's heat and vent it into space. The pillar constantly flushed supercooled exhaust fluids downward while drawing geothermal energy upward to power its localized energy shielding. However, Ezekiel had studied the schematics of the shattered drone. He found a secondary atmospheric exchange shaft, barely 3 meters wide, running parallel to the primary intake. It was a vertical tunnel of rushing, freezing water, and lethal pressure differentials. It was a suicide run, but it was their only way up, 400 kilometers above the crystallized surface. Grand Magistrate Kalen stood upon his orbital observation deck, entirely oblivious to the desperate ascent happening beneath the ice. He sipped a glowing, luminescent nectar from a crystal goblet, his cold eyes fixed on the holographic projection of Avalon's Reach. The tactical display showed the planetary surface temperature hovering near absolute zero. The biosphere was categorized as 99.9% neutralized. The great frozen oceans were silent. Kalen smiled, a thin, aristocratic curve of his pale lips. He admired the perfect, static purity of a dead world. To him, the ecosystem was successfully purged of its chaotic, organic disease. He did not know that a microscopic anomaly was currently bleeding into the very core of his flawless machine. The human ascent took 6 grueling hours. The physical toll was unimaginable. Inside the heavy suits, the engineers breathed stale, highly pressurized air, their muscles screaming as they forced themselves upward against the localized gravity dampeners of the alien shaft. They finally breached the internal waterline, stepping out onto the sleek, obsidian-like catwalks of the pillar's lower internal superstructure. They were now inside the belly of the beast. But the Valian internal security grid was a masterpiece of lethal, automated engineering, relying on hypersensitive quantum thermal mapping and biorhythmic scanners. To beat it, humanity did not use advanced stealth cloaks or counter-hacking tools. They relied on raw, grotesque nature. Dragging behind them on heavy, magnetic tethers were massive, severed chunks of a frozen leviathan, a deep-sea apex predator that had been flash-frozen during the initial strike. Ezekiel and his team huddled tightly beneath the thick, blubber-lined carapace of the dead beast as they slowly moved down the vast, brightly lit corridors. The Valian automated defense turrets and sensor arrays swept over them with harsh blue beams. The computers registered the decaying, ambient biological signature of cold, native fauna trapped in the infrastructure, categorized it as harmless organic debris, and simply ignored the warm human bodies hidden perfectly beneath the meat. It was a grim, disgusting camouflage, but the brutal simplicity of the tactic worked flawlessly against the overly complex alien algorithms. They reached the central command node, a vast, spherical chamber pulsating with streams of liquid light and floating holographic consoles. The core of the pillar. But their luck finally ran out, as they discarded the frozen leviathan flesh to access the primary terminal. A patrol of Valian star guards entered the chamber. They were towering figures encased in sleek, aerodynamic silver armor, armed with high-frequency particle rifles. For a split second, there was total silence. The elite alien warriors stared in absolute shock at the grease-stained, bulky human engineers trespassing in their most sacred sanctum. "Contact!" Sarah screamed. The firefight that erupted was brutally unbalanced. The star guards opened fire, their particle beams slicing through the air with searing heat. 2 human engineers were instantly vaporized, their heavy pressure suits completely failing against the military-grade alien weaponry. But the surviving humans did not retreat. They fired back with modified industrial tools. Sarah hefted a heavy-duty plasma mining cutter, a weapon meant to melt through solid bedrock, and unleashed a blinding, uncontrolled torrent of raw, white-hot plasma. The localized heat was so intense, it overloaded the energy shields of the two leading Valian guards, melting their pristine silver armor and incinerating them where they stood. The chamber became a chaotic hell of flashing lights, screaming metal, and deafening explosions. Another engineer fell, his chest plate shattered by a kinetic round. Ezekiel ignored the crossfire. He dove frantically toward the central floating console, sliding across the polished floor as a particle beam scorched the heavy plating of his shoulder. He ripped off his thick outer glove, his bare hands slick with sweat and his own blood, and slammed the microdata drive containing the Nemesis package directly into the master input port of the alien terminal. "Execute!" Ezekiel roared, smashing his fist onto the glowing confirmation rune. The Star Guards closed in, aiming their rifles for the execution shot. But suddenly, the weapons powered down. The elegant, ambient blue lighting of the entire spherical chamber violently shifted to a harsh, aggressive, and bloody crimson. A deafening, mechanical groan echoed through the massive structure, vibrating the very marrow in their bones. The Nemesis package was not a conventional computer virus meant to crash the system. High Command on Earth had realized that destroying the pillar would only leave the planet permanently frozen. Instead, Nemesis was a hyper-aggressive, military-grade artificial intelligence designed to forcefully rewrite localized environmental and genetic source codes. In a matter of milliseconds, the human AI infected the Valian mainframe, locked out all external orbital commands, and did the unthinkable. It violently reversed the entire terraforming cycle. The colossal machine was originally designed to suck heat from the ocean and vent it into the cold vacuum of space. The Nemesis AI instantly inverted the polarity of the massive thermal siphons. The purge pillar suddenly activated a gravity tether, locking onto the stellar radiation of the system's twin suns. It drew an astronomical amount of cosmic heat directly from outer space, amplifying it through the alien prismatic lenses, and blasted that concentrated solar fury straight down into the frozen core of the planet. The effect was apocalyptic. The temperature inside the pillar spiked to over 1,000 degrees in 3 seconds. The absolute zero ice encasing the planetary surface did not merely melt. It underwent instantaneous, violent sublimation. Ezekiel and Sarah watched through the reinforced transparent floor of the chamber as the world below them detonated. The sudden, immense introduction of cosmic heat into the supercooled environment created a massive shockwave of displaced energy. The frozen ocean shattered. Billions of tons of solid ice flashed instantly into high-pressure steam and boiling liquid. This violent expansion displaced the ocean floor, creating a hyper-tsunami of boiling water. A wall of roaring, superheated ocean, standing nearly 5,000 meters high, erupted from the epicenter of the pillar. It raced across the globe at supersonic speeds. The Valian surface installations, the elegant floating staging bases, and the atmospheric harvesters that had been confidently deployed on the ice were caught completely off guard. They were not designed to withstand a boiling wall of kinetic fury. The tsunami slammed into the alien bases, instantly crushing their shields and melting their superstructures. The boiling water swept across the entire planet, dissolving the Valian ground forces and erasing every single trace of their surface occupation in a matter of minutes. Earth had not just saved the deep-sea colonists. They had turned the aliens' own execution weapon into a catastrophic, planetary-scale bomb that wiped the invaders off the face of the world. High above the boiling, turbulent atmosphere of Avalon's Reach, the pristine, sterile tranquility of the Valian flagship bridge was shattered. Grand Magistrate Kalen gripped the edges of his crystalline command dais, his multi-jointed fingers turning stark white. The massive holographic projection in the center of the room, previously a serene display of a perfectly frozen world, was now a violent maelstrom of aggressive crimson warning runes. He watched in absolute frantic disbelief as the telemetry data confirmed the impossible. His own terraforming engine had been hijacked, weaponized, and detonated by the very organisms he had sought to exterminate. The localized thermal flash had generated a planetary tsunami of superheated water, instantly erasing every single Valian surface installation, atmospheric harvester, and ground battalion. Millions of his elite soldiers and priceless terraforming machines were boiled into nothingness in a matter of minutes. The mask of aristocratic indifference fell away, replaced by the ugly, raw contortion of pure fury. Kalen bared his teeth, turning to his supreme tactical officer. "Target the planet," Kalen roared, his voice cracking with a manic edge. "Align all 500 dreadnoughts in low orbit. Spin up the primary orbital cannons. I want every single square meter of that miserable rock turned into radioactive glass. Burn the oceans, melt the crust. Leave absolutely nothing alive." Across the dark expanse of orbit, the vast Valian armada responded. 500 colossal, prismatic warships shifted their formidable bulk, their sleek geometric bows pointing down toward the churning, steamy clouds of the planet. Along the hulls of these immense vessels, thousands of heavy plasma batteries and kinetic bombardment rails began to charge. The vacuum of space was illuminated by the terrifying, synchronized glow of building energy. A collective firepower, capable of cracking a planetary mantle. They were 30 seconds away from reducing Avalon's reach to cinders. Then, the fundamental fabric of reality surrounding the star system began to scream. It was not the localized pinpoint spatial rupture that typically preceded a fleet emerging from hyperspace. This was a macroscopic, system-wide distortion. The ambient light of the distant stars smeared into long, unnatural streaks. The gravitational baseline of the entire sector dropped by an impossible margin. Kalen and his bridge crew were thrown to the deck as the artificial gravity of the flagship violently stuttered. The Valians braced for the arrival of a massive, vengeful human armada. They expected thousands of heavily armored cruisers, strike fighters, and dreadnoughts pouring out of the void to engage in a chaotic, bloody naval battle. Instead, the spatial tear stabilized, and only a single entity glided out from the depths of higher dimensions. It was not a fleet. It was a singular, terrifying monument to human engineering. The construct was a colossal, ring-shaped superspace station, its diameter easily dwarfing the largest moons of the system. Its hull was forged from a dark, light-absorbing composite that made it look like a hole punched directly through the universe. Etched across its massive, curving superstructure were glowing identification letters spelling a single name: the Kronos. As the Valian tactical sensors swept over the monstrous ring, confusion rippled through the alien fleet. The Kronos possessed 0 heavy plasma batteries. It had no railguns, no torpedo tubes, and no visible energy shielding. Instead, the entire outer circumference of the station was clad in towering, interconnected dark matter particle accelerators. Earth had not brought a sword to this execution. They had brought a scalpel. "Concentrate all firepower on that construct," Kalen screamed, pulling himself up from the floor, his panic now overriding his rage. "Fire everything we have." The entire Valian armada unleashed hell. 500 dreadnoughts fired simultaneously. A blinding, deafening wave of hypervelocity kinetic slugs, searing plasma beams, and antimatter torpedoes crossed the void, all converging on the silent, dark ring of the Kronos. It was a barrage dense enough to obliterate a small moon. Yet, the human station did not even attempt to evade. As the overwhelming wave of destruction closed the distance, the colossal particle accelerators along the ring flared into life. They did not project a defensive shield. They manipulated raw physics by accelerating dark matter particles to near-luminal speeds. The Kronos generated an artificial, highly condensed gravitational anomaly directly in front of its bow. It birthed a localized accretion disk a spinning, flattened vortex of immense gravitational pull, similar to the event horizon of a newborn black hole. The Valian firepower struck the anomaly and broke. The immutable laws of astrophysics took over. The searing plasma beams were effortlessly bent from their linear paths, swirling into the glowing disk. The hypervelocity kinetic rounds were caught in the crushing gravity well. Their momentum siphoned away before they were ground into subatomic dust. Even the antimatter torpedoes were swallowed whole, their explosive yields utterly neutralized by the crushing pressure of the artificial singularity. The brilliant, desperate light of the alien attack simply spiraled down into the dark, feeding the very machine they were trying to destroy. It was a display of absolute, cold, intellectual superiority. Humanity was demonstrating that raw, muscular firepower was obsolete when you could command the fundamental forces of the universe. "Magistrate!" the tactical officer gasped, his voice trembling as he stared at the rapidly updating telemetry. "Our hyperdrive motivators are spinning down. The navigation computers cannot lock onto any jump coordinates. The localized space-time geometry has been severely flattened." Kalen stared at the massive, dark ring, a profound, icy dread pooling in his stomach. Earth had not brought the Kronos to fight a battle of attrition. They had brought it to spring a trap. The artificial gravity well expanding from the station was not just a defensive measure. It was a cosmic cage. The Kronos was actively anchoring the surrounding spatial fabric, locking the entire 500-ship Valian fleet firmly within the bounds of real space. Humanity had systematically and flawlessly stripped the invaders of their ability to jump into hyperspace, cutting off any chance of retreat. The prey had finally locked the door with the predators inside. Trapped within the absolute, suffocating grip of the artificial gravity, well, Grand Magistrate Kalen completely refused to accept the reality of his checkmate. The magnificent hyperdrive engines of his 500 warships whined in futile, mechanical agony against the unbreakable spatial anchor. He straightened his luminescent crystalline robes, projecting a desperate illusion of supreme, unshakable authority. "Open a wideband diplomatic channel to that human construct," he ordered, his voice cold and arrogant, broadcasting across all open galactic frequencies. "Humans, you have temporarily disabled my immediate forces with this trick, but you are making a fatal miscalculation. I am a Grand Magistrate of the Valian Empire. We have tens of thousands of armadas waiting in the deep black of this galaxy. If you do not disengage this gravity tether immediately, we will turn your primitive Earth into a lifeless sea of radioactive glass. Surrender your station now, and I may grant your chaotic species a quick, merciful extinction." The universe held its breath. The wider galactic community, watching the conflict unfold through long-range stealth sensor probes, waited eagerly for the defiant human response. They expected a passionate, roaring speech of freedom, a stubborn demand for unconditional surrender, or perhaps a desperate, frantic attempt at tactical negotiation. Instead, humanity delivered a terrifying, apocalyptic silence. The Kronos did not open a communications link. It did not broadcast a righteous manifesto. Earth was not interested in taking 500 dreadnoughts as prisoners of war. Humanity did not wage wars of attrition, and they certainly did not negotiate with entities that casually committed planetary genocide. Deep within the dark, light-absorbing ring of the Kronos, a new, entirely silent sequence initiated. It was not a weapon of kinetic impact or blinding energy, but a weapon of pure, cold, mathematical displacement. The superstation activated an inverse quantum displacement portal. In a display of godlike computational supremacy, the station's artificial intelligence forcibly synchronized with the crippled navigation matrices of all 500 Valian warships simultaneously. It linked their individual spatial coordinates together, binding the entire armada into a single, inescapable quantum entanglement web. And then, the Chronos simply pushed. There was no grand, fiery, orbital bombardment. There were no deafening explosions, shattering the vacuum of the void. In a single, absolute fraction of a second, completely devoid of any sound or visual flash, the entire invading armada vanished. The sky above Avalon's reach was instantly empty. They were not destroyed in orbit. They were violently relocated. The Chronos had instantaneously folded the fabric of space-time, displacing the massive fleet millions of light-years away. The human machine deposited all 500 pristine Valian dreadnoughts directly into the super-dense, violently burning core of a dying white dwarf star. The invaders were crushed into subatomic paste by a gravitational force millions of times stronger than their own world engines. Their atoms fused into heavy metals before their synapses could even register the catastrophic change in temperature. Back on the surface of Avalon's reach, the violent, boiling storm had finally settled. The hyper-tsunami had scoured the continents clean of the alien taint, and the atmosphere was slowly stabilizing as the planet's natural thermal regulators desperately took over. Ezekiel Burkett stood on the dripping, heavily reinforced deck of the surfaced central city. He pushed back the heavy titanium visor of his helmet and looked upward. The sky, previously choked by prismatic nightmares and towering death machines, was now a breathtaking, undisturbed canvas of pale, peaceful blue, illuminated softly by the warm light of the twin suns. His wrist communicator chimed with a soft, gentle tone. It was a localized automated text sequence, completely devoid of human emotion, anger, or triumph. Threat removed. Relief package arriving in 2 hours. Welcome back to the sky. Across the vast, ancient expanse of the Milky Way, a profound, horrifying realization washed over the countless, watching galactic empires. The bustling digital networks of 1,000 advanced civilizations went entirely dark. They had just witnessed a terrifying paradigm shift that utterly shattered their understanding of interstellar warfare. Earth had not merely defeated an invasion force, they had sent an eternal, chilling message written in the language of physics itself. Humanity was not loud. They were not boastful. But if you threatened their home, if you pushed their people to the absolute brink, they would not fight you in the mud. They would simply calculate the exact coordinates of your demise and systematically erase you from the fabric of reality with a cold, absolute finality. The universe looked at the small, quiet, blue marble of Earth and collectively understood one immutable, silent law. Never, ever touch a world belonging to humanity. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We truly appreciate you taking this incredible journey with us to the very end. Please, let us know in the comments where you are listening to this story from right now. If you found today's adventure exciting and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can do this easily by scanning the QR code on your screen, or by clicking the donation link found in the video description or the pinned comment. Your generous support is the only way we can pay our dedicated writers and narrators, helping them provide for their families so they can continue creating these amazing sci-fi universes for you. Thank you again, and we cannot wait to see you in the next story.